the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Today, we have a special guest with us, Chris McClure, the author of The Way to Greatness. Chris, how you doing?
Doing awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Good. Now, tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so this book was kind of it was definitely an answer to prayer, maybe an answer to pleading to God. And honestly, I was meeting all these awesome authors that we know through the Igniting Souls community with Author Academy Elite as our publisher. And I was like, these people have amazing messages. What's my message? You know, like, God, what is it for me? And I couldn't figure it out. And I was just racking my brain and literally just about a little bit over 2.5 years ago, 2018, it was like one day I was sitting here in my office and I just spun around in my chair and I had this 5-step acronym kind of given to me as I was working on a project, and actually redoing my website. And my business is Lead Life Big. Big stands for Be Intentionally Great. Mm-hmm. And I kept going, God, what does it mean to truly be great? What is that? You know? And so the 5 parts are God-centered living, relational health, enthusiastic mindset, asset stewardship, and time maximization. And I realized these are 5 areas that people trip up on the most in some way, shape, or form. They're the areas where people are struggling, you know, whether it's, you know, I need to grow my faith, or my relationships aren't healthy, or, you know, my mindset's not right. You know, maybe I'm in debt and I can't get out of this hole, and I can't get the financial freedom. So that's tripping me up. Or maybe I'm slammed, I'm busy, and my time is all, because those are the things when I coach people, that's kind of where it all tends to land, somewhere in there.
Right.
And so this book became this framework of helping people. Those are 5 choices that I talk about in the book. And each of those choices have a 5-step process to help you go from kind of where you are to where, you know, God would have you be, to really experience a life that He wants you to live. So it really is a life coaching book of sorts. You know, when people try to ask me to explain it, it's kind of for everyone. And I know that's kind of a broad audience in a sense,
right.
But I've thought about, like, I want to be proactive to help younger people get this right instead of being in middle age, you know, midlife, trying to figure it out. But I've also had older people who are like, you know, I wish I'd have known this when I was younger. And so they're learning from it too. So that's been the premise of the book, is just, you know, it's based on John 10:10. You know, Jesus said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to give them life to the full, or rich, satisfying, abundant life. And I just don't see many people living that way. And I wasn't living that way. You know, I felt like there was something missing. And that's actually on the back of the book. You know, the first headline for that back cover is, there has to be more to life than this. And I think a lot of people feel that way, because it's not that life is bad, but they just feel like something is missing.
Mm-hmm. Good. What's been the biggest, as far as impact, what's been the biggest surprise that you've seen come out of the book? Just how it's impacting people and how it's, you know, changing their lives. What's been the biggest surprise for you?
Well, probably the biggest surprise came about 3 or 4 months ago now, if that far back. So I do business executive coaching with senior leaders and companies and small business owners. And one of the employees that I don't even coach picked up a copy of my book. He knew of my book, and he was reading it for his own personal growth and development. And I don't think he's a committed believer. But he messaged me on LinkedIn and said, hey man, I'm reading your book, really getting a lot out of it. It's making me really think hard. And is there a workbook for this? Which I do have a digital workbook that people can get. And so I got him that. And he just said, you know, I really want to go through this. And honestly, he's been going through a transition. He actually is in a career transition right now. And so he wrote up a testimonial for me and said that he didn't expect this book to help him with his business acumen. Mm-hmm. And it blew my mind, because I'm like, this isn't a business book, you know, that wasn't the intent.
Right.
But the lessons probably about, you know, mindset, stewardship, time, you know, relationships, and even how your faith plays a role in every aspect of your life. You know, he saw it as this thing to help him, even looking at his whole career from a business standpoint. So I would say that's probably been the biggest thing,
Mhm.
is that surprised me. Um, People telling me that the book, I mean, you picked it up. I mean, it's not this real thick, heavy book. It's a
Right.
pretty small, thinner, it's a couple hundred pages, but people say, Chris, you make me really think
Mhm.
hard. There's
Yeah.
a lot, because I put a lot of questions. There's questions throughout the chapters. There's reflection questions. It truly is a coaching book. It's something
Mhm.
that I can coach you through it, but you can read it and go through it yourself and really go deep. And so I think I didn't know it was as deep as it is for
Right.
people, I would say, but I really do believe it was a message that God gave me. It wasn't something that I just had been working on. This isn't a Chris manufactured kind of a message, right? This
Right.
was, I sat down and was like, Lord, what do you want me to say?
Mhm.
What do you have to say about this? And
Mhm.
so I think people are being impacted by it because of that.
Yeah. Well, and I would agree. I think, even as I was going through it, one thing that struck me was, you know, it's very simple. The way to greatness, your principles they're simple. And so that's
Hmm.
it's almost a little bit deceiving. But when you get into the book and you start reading it, you start to realize like the depth, and you realize how much it's impacting you on things that we kind of just take for granted because we've already thought about it, or we've kind of processed through it on some level or whatever. But then as you're going through your framework and reading through the chapters, you're realizing, oh, I don't have this as figured out as maybe I thought I did, or maybe as much as I want to, or maybe
Hmm.
I thought I had it figured out, but you can see how it's tied to maybe something that's uncomfortable or something that's not working right in your life, and you're not drawing those lines until you get into the book and you start to realize, oh, Chris is really bringing this home for me in a very simplistic way.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing. As I was talking to another friend of mine about it, we started talking about this metaphor of climbing a mountain. It's almost like each of these choices, it's like you're climbing a mountain, and each of the action steps is like a new level on the mountain. But then the thing is, you get to that top, you get to the peak, you really realize, hey, there's another mountain out there to climb in this same area. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of like everything as we develop in life, you would get to a certain level and you kind of think you've arrived, and
Mhm.
then you realize, wait a second, this is just my new floor, and
Right.
that's another,
Yeah.
I've got another area to, way to go. And so you've got young kids. I mean, as a husband, as a father, we know, like, even realizing now, I've got kids that are entering their teenage years, and I'm realizing I wasn't built for this. I love being a dad of young kids, and now I'm going, I was a youth pastor for 12 years. And I'm like, I know what's coming, like,
Right.
and
Exactly.
and so I'm like, I didn't realize how much the early years were so easy for me. And so now the relational health part, the protect your relationships, which is what the choice is in my book, is going to really be important, I think, for me, for my wife, for our family, as well as just peer-to-peer relationships or business relationships. And so for me, I think new stages, that's why I tell people, I'm like, this isn't a book that you really read it once and it's done forever.
Right.
It's really
Right.
one of those that that I hope that people revisit from time to
Mhm.
time and kind of refresh themselves and go, okay, how do I go from where I am now, my new
Right.
starting point,
Mhm.
to where I want to be, whether it's in my marriage, my parenting, my friendships, my work, whatever.
Yeah. Well, even though it's not written like a reference book, it is that. It's something you can keep going back to over and over again and processing through, because every time you get a new stage of life,
Hmm.
the book applies again in a brand new way. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely has some lasting power in the book. And so now you are a top 10 finalist with the Author Elite Awards.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And is it the religious nonfiction? Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Uh-huh.
So was that a surprise for you, or were you expecting that?
It was a surprise because I had promoted that I was in I was entering my book
Mhm.
months ago, and
Right.
then I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah.
And
Well, right
then
at the
it was
beginning
like,
of
oh, the
COVID.
deadline. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then it was like, oh yeah, the deadline for voting is coming up, and so I just kind of put it back out there again. And I didn't know how, we don't know how we're really doing in the voting
Right.
along the way, right? But I was like, all of a sudden I'm notified. People are congratulating. I wasn't even on the announcement call at
Yeah.
the time, and I'm getting pinged by all sorts of people going, "Hey, congratulations!" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, so
Yeah.
yes, it was a surprise, and it's one of those things where that I just kind of threw it in there saying, "Hey, whatever happens, happens." It's
Right.
like, as you know, it's but it really does. It's kind of neat because I know myself, I downplay my own successes a lot of times, or I
Mhm.
downplay things. People around me are super excited that it's getting that traction, and they've been watching my journey, and they've been, kind of reconnected with some people because they've seen it, out there again, and just had the 1 year anniversary of publishing it back on September 6th, which was my birthday when I launched a year ago. So just had my birthday and its first birthday.
Nice.
Um, and so, just kind of realizing I'm the kind of guy that gets a project done and moves on to the next project
Mhm.
very easily, but realizing this thing isn't, I need to keep it out there. I need to make sure that
Right.
I try to get it into people's hands because it is, like you said, you never know how a book does long term,
Mhm.
but I do prayerfully want it to be impacting lives for years to come.
Mhm. Well, and even like, the Igniting Souls tribe leader, Carrie, says all the time, it's not about selling books, it's about helping people. And so,
Yeah.
because that's been one of the struggles with me is especially with, as the awards have come and all of that, it's like, I feel like I'm pushing myself, but then I just keep remembering what he says. It's not about pushing you or pushing the book. It's about putting a tool in someone's hands to help
Yeah.
them out, which, again, your book is great for doing that. So
Yeah.
as you know, most of the community in Ministry Hackers are pastors and ministry leaders. So how would this be a great tool for them to use both personally and professionally?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is that, we people in our churches, right? They're going through life every day. We know as ministry leaders that we hear the good, the bad, and the ugly a lot of times. And whether you're a youth pastor like I was for a dozen years, and then I shifted to more an associate and executive pastor role, um, you just hear things and you realize people are struggling. And so for me, I believe it's a tool because it is very biblically based. It's very, I share a lot of scripture and connect dots of scripture and you know practical help for today through this. And how did Jesus model this? How did he show this? Even at the end of each section, I talk about him um, living the life that shows us this way of greatness. And so I think a lot of it is for people who might be struggling with how do I grow in my faith? I mean, it's a very simple plan in the first section about um, if I don't have a quiet time, if I don't have a daily, rhythm of connecting with God, I put that in there. How do you start that? How do you do this well? And so it's consistent and it's a discipline that you build into your life. How do you evaluate your relationships? How do you, overcome the mental barriers and stuff that you're dealing with, as the third section and overcome that. And then, how do I become a good steward? And then finally, how do I make the most of my time?
Right.
And so when you hear people that are maybe struggling with some of those core life areas and issues, I think this book could be a good resource to put in their hand. I did early on. One of the things that I didn't plan on, but somebody asked me for, was a small group discussion guide, and so I
Mhm.
did create. I turned it into a 7 session group discussion guide that I give away as well. So if people just if they want to buy a set of books and do like as a small group study or
Mhm.
whatever, they can get the discussion guide as well to walk just as to help them through that.
Right.
So that's a tool to use as well. But yeah, I think it's just a lot of times people just need help with life, and I think it's a practical guide to
Especially
help
now.
them with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yep. Now you mentioned that you've spent your career in ministry for the most part. Um, is there anything about ministry, about being a full-time pastor that you miss now that you're not doing that?
I would say it's just the everyday interaction, with the staff and with people that I mean now obviously with COVID, it's like people aren't walking in the building every day doing the things they normally used to do, but I'm a very social person, very pastoral care and connecting with people is at my foundation of who I was and am as a leader. And so I miss that, I would say, because am so social. Um, but at the same time, I'm realizing that I can add value to our church, in various ways. I serve on our operations team, from looking at it from the business and leadership side, helping that way now. And I just recently stepped away from the teaching team. I was one of the guys that rotated to preach every so often, and so there were things that I just time had to constraints had to kind of make me step away from a couple things. But yeah, I think it's that it's just that it's the people, it's the connection, and it was definitely a great season for me in my life, and now's a different season, a new season for sure. But seeing God do some cool things outside of that situation too.
Right. Yeah, I think that for me, the biggest challenge stepping out of ministry full time is just the team, being around the other pastors
Yeah,
and, just having that interaction on a regular basis. That for me
yeah,
would be is the biggest challenge as well. So,
yeah.
so then what would you say, to all of the pastors and ministry leaders? We've gone through arguably the most challenging season any of us have ever faced. And so,
Yeah.
and we have a lot of pastors who are, frustrated, they're struggling. Some churches are, asking the question, should we close our doors? The statistics on pastors looking to maybe exit the ministry are starting to rise. And so what is something you would say to them? What advice or encouragement would you give pastors at this point, as we're, not really at any point is this going to come to an end. So we still have a long haul in front of us. So what would you say to them to kind of encourage them to stay in there and keep going?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, it's easy for us to get wrapped up in programs and doing stuff, right? We kind of get dependent on that, and that rug got pulled out from under us almost instantly.
Right.
Um, and so we went online and we adapted, I think, as churches, and many churches have done well. Some have struggled, depending on how comfortable you are with technology, for sure. But one thing I'm noticing is it's almost like I tell people, we got so used to email and text messaging and digital communication that sending a letter or a card in the mail starts to make a big difference. And I think in this season, we are so used to the digital that picking up the phone and calling somebody or trying to find a way to connect with somebody more personally, I think is, people need shepherding right now, because they're, like I said, they're dealing with their own struggles in their own lives. Maybe they have job losses, or just now they're working from home, or they're trying to do this online schooling thing with their kids and going
Right.
crazy, and so I think that it's a time for pastoral care to kind of be elevated.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, I think that can easily be overlooked right now because we have been so program or digitally driven. The other thing is, that I think that COVID has exposed within the church and outside the church even, is what we thought was secure isn't secure.
Right.
We thought that stable jobs, at a company or whatever, um, that for decades and generations, people have sought after, those things kind of got kicked out from under us as well. And so I think for pastors, there are many that are bivocational already, but I've really started to talk to some about what does it look like to be strategically bivocational,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not just because you have to, because the church is struggling maybe financially, or and that may be the case. But what if you do that not because you have to, as much as you get to connect in the marketplace in a new way as part of your ministry
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you hadn't thought of before? And so I think that, I know for me at least, it was easy to get kind of sheltered inside the church office, the church staffing, right? I mean, you kind of insert yourself into a bubble if you're not careful. And so I think we're in a new era in a lot of ways of how do we expand our influence, our reach, our impact, while also giving ourselves some options with finances and our income.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that many times pastors have felt like less than if they were bivocational because they weren't at a big enough church that could pay them a full-time salary or
Right.
do certain things with benefits, right? I think now we have an opportunity to take ourselves and our skill set to the world. And I know for me, when I stepped out of my day job, so to speak, of ministry at the church, I didn't understand my value. And I know a lot of pastors are probably struggling with that, thinking about what is my value beyond what I've done in the church. But people need pastors in the marketplace. I tell people I went from being an executive pastor to a pastor to executives with
Mm-hmm.
my business.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that at first. It took me a while to really kind of connect those dots. But people need that. So I think there's opportunities for us, whatever, whether you're a good teacher and trainer, you can do some things, or, whether it's, going and getting a 9 to 5 kind of a job, or a part-time job on the side where you're working at I've worked in retail, I've worked in a hotel, I've done some things off and on over the years where there's a lot of influence and impact to be made in the marketplace, no matter whether you start your own business or go, become an employee at a company too. So
Mm-hmm.
so I think those are kind of two big rocks that I've kind of been paying attention to, is the personalization of ministry again, that
Yeah.
maybe we've disconnected from, and being strategically bivocational, like Paul was,
Mhm.
with his tent making business, so that he could reach the community.
Right. Well, and I think some of that is just us as pastors trying to disconnect from just the habits we've gotten into, the habits of busyness and the
Mhm.
habits of, I have this whole mound of tasks that need to be done. And so I do those instead of, pastor people or, do the pastoral care like you're talking about. And I think some of it is just, that adjustment period back to like what you're saying, that pastoral care. It's, number one, it's challenging to make the adjustment. But then number two, you also have all these expectations of, well, the church isn't growing anymore. And how do we count online? And, all of these questions that we, really don't have a lot of concrete answers for. And so,
Yeah,
pastors are just kind of caught in the middle of a whole lot. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I think you're right. Just trying to focus back in on people and serving and, building those relationships. Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's definitely
yeah.
doable.
Well, even to that point, Brandon, I think that, I saw a thing online recently. It said, if you reopen, 50% of people are going to be mad at you and think
Right.
you're crazy because you're, putting people in danger. If you don't reopen, people are thinking you're a terrible leader and a coward, right? Like,
Yep.
and so in a sense, it's kind of like politics. You don't feel like you can win either way. But I
Right.
believe that if you're truly engaging and connecting and caring for people, then they're going to still have their opinions. We know that we're in a world full of opinions and screaming people online these days. But the reality is that when they know you care for them, they give you a lot more grace and space and are more willing to be patient with you. Um, and so I think that just being, I have friends in ministry who they're kind of awkward. They don't. I mean, one guy I know, it petrified him to pick up the phone and call people. It
Yeah.
was so. Another guy, he'll tell me that he called somebody, and I realized, no, you didn't. You just texted somebody. That's not the same thing. And
Right.
so, but people that are more introverted or not as comfortable maybe socially, those things kind of do freak them out. And so
Mhm.
this whole thing is more of a challenge to some than others for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and
But I
especially our,
think that once again,
especially younger pastors who calling somebody up on the phone has never really been a normal part of their life.
right. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, because you and I, when we started in ministry, we were in that kind of that bridge era,
Yeah.
where, I remember having to yell down the hall, like, is anybody online so that I don't kick them off of AOL,
Right.
and how, and the big thing for us was getting high speed internet so that all of us could be online, right? Like
Right.
that was, 2001, I think. So 20 years ago, that's the world we lived in versus today, we got the internet in our pocket and we're, 24/7 access. So you're right. I mean, I think, like I said, I think in some ways it's almost like it feels revolutionary to go backward in time for
Right.
the personal connection. But I've noticed that over the years, like when I used to handwrite notes every so often. If somebody came to my mind, I didn't mind emailing people or shooting them a text message or giving them a call, but I would often write a handwritten note every so often to people and just say, hey, just thinking about you, appreciate all you're doing. And I literally would get emails back from people going, hey, thank you so much
Yeah.
for sending me that card in the
Yeah.
mail.
It means so much to them.
Yeah. So it was funny that I was getting a thank you for sending them a thank you note. But it was not something they were used to. And it just reminded me how, there are some things that we throw out with generations and we say, oh, that's just old school or whatever.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when you think about what at the core, people want to connect, they want to feel loved, they want to feel cared for. And so pick up the phone right now and call somebody who's kind of been shut in or not feeling comfortable or safe to be out. That goes a long way. I mean, even yesterday, a fellow in our church that I haven't seen for 6 months now. He's my age, but I just haven't seen him. I shot him an email and said, "Hey, just wanted to check in. How are you and your family doing?" And he's an international businessman, and we emailed back and forth a couple times to touch base, and I know that meant something to him,
Mhm.
and that's not even me as a pastor on a staff doing that. It was just
Right. Just
a
reaching.
brother in Christ reaching out to somebody, and people just need that. I mean, people don't want to feel forgotten, and I think right now we're just prone to at least people feeling that way, even if they really aren't forgotten. We just need to be careful of that because I think that's why people are going, okay, is our church shrinking or are we
Mhm.
okay? Or, because if you don't connect with people, you don't really know the state of where they are.
Right. Yep. Yep. Well, and to your point about pastors being stuck in the middle, I think you're right. I think that's, it almost feels like they can't make a good decision because every decision has a huge negative impact.
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that I've seen is the churches or the pastors in the churches that seem to somehow rise above the fray are the pastors who seem to be doubling down on the mission of Christ and just focusing on that, not taking a political stance, not siding either way, but just saying, you know what, in the midst of all this, we're going to double down on the mission that God has given us, and we're going to focus there. And I think that, at least from an outside observation standpoint, the churches and the pastors that have done that seem to somehow kind of skirt their way through all of the landmines that we're all finding ourselves in the midst of.
Yeah. And even to that point, I'm on our Chamber of Commerce board here in our community, and we were having the issue of the other day on our board, we're talking about how do we respond to some of the societal stuff, because people were asking some of our board members, what's our stance? And, the board decided, hey, we're not going to, we want to stay true to our mission. And our mission is inclusive. Our mission is trying to support local businesses, and we have diversity on our board. We have diversity in our community. And so some of the hot topic issues in our culture, we're like, you know what, we would feel like we're being reactive because we have to, because somebody thinks we should, versus staying the course. And so I think you're right. I mean, if, even our church right now, we're going through the Sermon on the Mount as a series, and just looking at the subtitle is living right side up in an upside down world, and talk about the kingdom of God, and helping our folks remember that this, Jesus was revolutionary because things were so upside down in his culture that he walked this earth in. We're just seeing it in a different version, a different way, but loving people. I mean, I think that's where my confusion has come from. A lot of the stuff online, I'm going, I try to love people no matter who they are and what they do and what color of their skin or whatever, age or whatever demographic you want to throw into it. And so for me, I wrestle with that. Like, what kind of a public stance am I supposed to make when I want to live my life the way Jesus would want us to live?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's tough though.
Yep. So you are working on a second book, right?
Yeah.
What's the title of it?
So this one is called The Magnetic Leader, and the subtitle is 18 Essential Actions of Great Leaders Who Attract Quality Team Members and Keep Them Engaged. Because that's a major issue in the marketplace today, is where do I find good people? And then once you have people, are they engaged or not? Because that's a big problem, in the typical workplace. So this is really about the characteristics of their actions, but their characteristics of who you are as a leader. So it's more about it's character driven, I'll say, so it's about, what's your posture, what's your attitude that you come to work with or to lead your people with. And so it's different than the way to greatness, in the sense that it isn't solely a biblically, referencing book, so to speak. But what was interesting is I felt very compelled as I was writing it that I needed to show how Jesus modeled these at some level. And so at the end of the book, I was going to put an appendix and say, okay, here's how Jesus did these 18 things well.
Right.
And as I wrote all those, and I thought, you know what, I think they need to just be end of chapter, little articles after the reflection questions, so that, people can skip over them, because this is intended for truly a business owner and executive kind of audience. So people can skip over them for sure, but I really am hopeful and prayerful that people will read this and realize that, and see Jesus in a new way, because he did, he was what I'm calling the ultimate magnetic leader. He was the guy who attracted people to him because he did these things, and they stayed engaged with him because of how he acted. It came from his character. And, a friend of mine said to me recently, he goes, Christian, really your messages of what you're saying, whether it's The Way to Greatness or this book or future books that I have lined up, or it's about being before doing, but it's a both and, and so this book is really about the being side of the leader,
right?
But also giving you key actions of what to do in order to express that, to attract and to engage people.
Well, and I think it's a very timely book because, over the last couple of years, and especially this year, we've seen the shift towards more looking at the quality of the leader, the character development, and more so than just the skill set. And I think it's because over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen when we prioritize skill over character, we've kind of seen the negative impact of that. And so when you start when you start to, shift and start asking the question, okay, well, what's the quality of the leader that you're following? And even as we're coming into kind of some new territory with, the ethical questions of, is this right or is it wrong, or should we even do it at all? I think your book is going to kind of fit right into that conversation of, yes, we can teach anybody the skills, but do they have the actual character and the ethical compass necessary to truly lead and be worthy of following? And so,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see kind of how your book fits into that.
Yeah, and I've kind of thought about it from the standpoint of this kind of being like the skeleton of a body. You can have the flesh and muscles and every ligaments and everything else, but you've got to have the skeleton that's strong and healthy to hold everything up. And so my series of books, I'm going to have, this is the magnetic leader. The next one I'm going to write is the magnetic team. And then I'm going to also write the magnetic life as kind of a trilogy together, because once again, even it just all goes back to who you are as a leader, and what kind of people are you bringing together. And then how does your life, as a holistic person affect your leadership, and how does your leadership for your professional life affect your home life and your relationship? So wanting to look at it from kind of these different angles and views, because you're right. I mean, every political season's always character smearing, it seems like, and
Right.
everything, but I think with social media and just the internet in general, we just see this happening more and more. Like, it's that whole thing of you spend a lifetime building up your reputation and you can lose it in a moment. We've seen that happen, unfortunately, with some very dynamic, well-known, famous pastors even in the last few years.
Right.
And it's a shame to watch that happen, for one, but for various reasons, I do think the enemy, once again, he's trying to take out key people, because with one leader that is well renowned or followed, you can wipe out a whole, flock of people, of followers, right? So I think we need to really guard our character, and that's one of the things I talk about even in my book. One of the things is guard your integrity. And what I've tried to do at the beginning of each chapter is give an illustration of a current day modern person and how they emulated these characteristics. But that chapter alone, I said, okay, this is less about a person and more about what we see in society, right? Like, when you see an Enron kind of a company fall apart because the character of the leaders at the top, with corruption and everything, I mean, decimated thousands of people's lives, the business no longer exists, all these things, right?
Right.
But we see that in churches, we see that in ministries as well. When somebody doesn't really guard their integrity, it can blow up the whole thing that was really a God ordained and God started venture. So yeah, I'm excited about this one, especially. I love leadership, and I've been a student of leadership for all my adult life, but I really am excited about teaching this and really helping people understand it more, because once again, I think we immediately go to the tactical, how to's and the what's of leadership, because we want results. And results do matter. The very last chapter is about, if you don't produce results, then yeah, all these other things are nice, but people won't necessarily follow you for long either. So you have to produce results as a leader, but results, and have to be framed inside, who am I as a leader, and do I have good character, and how I'm operating.
Right. That's good. And when does that one come out?
So hopefully in November. It's in process, getting edited, finished up right now, and then the steps that it takes. But my goal, I was telling you before we jumped on here, right? Like, I was thinking November 4th, I'll launch this thing. And then I realized, oh, November 3rd is election day. That's probably not a good idea. I'll be covered up with everything. So I'm hoping maybe by mid-November, I would like to get it out before Thanksgiving. And really, still, even in the height of all the political season of election time and everything, I really do think that it can address a lot of the issues that we're bantering about today, in our world. But once again, I'm just super excited to get it out there and help leaders. Once again, even many of these things, it's kind of like my first book, Brandon. It's like, people aren't going to go, I've never heard of that before. Like, a lot of these things are just so foundational, and they are simple, but it's the simple stuff that we can often overlook the most. And I tell people, I'm a simple guy. I learn in simple ways. I teach simply. I write simply, because for me, I think we overlook the obvious a lot of times. And so I'm hoping that this book may be a refresher if need to be, but it also might be like an eye opener for some people. Like, oh, if I'm rating myself, I'm pretty weak in that area, and I need to really focus in on that. So, so yeah.
Good. Just in time for Christmas.
That's right. Yeah, get it. Christmas gift, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, you and I are both authors through the Author Academy Elite. So
Yeah.
how did you come into the Author Academy and Igniting Souls? How did you find out about them?
Yeah, so I guess it was kind of a two-way path, kind of merging. But a friend of mine, who actually is my editor and helped me with kind of outlining my books, he had mentioned he had met Carrie or learned of Carrie Overrunner through another person that's in that tribe, who when the program was kind of early in its launching, or kind of, I think 2016, early 2016 is when I found it. And so I just kind of watched a webinar and learned. I when I was 19 or 20, I thought I want to write a book someday. I remember saying that to people, and but I had no clue what I'd write it about.
Right.
It wasn't like I had this topic that I wanted to write about. But I always had that interest, and so when I watched the webinar to learn about publishing in today's reality, in today's world, I was really intrigued, and so it kind of started me down that path of really prayerfully considering what does that look like for me, and when would I do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was 2 years afterwards that I ultimately joined Author Academy Elite and the coaching program, and to get published through that. But it was definitely that journey. And then I got connected more to Carrie with his monthly fellowships that he does and his trainings, and really just started to learn what does it mean to build a business, and really take your book and your message and make it more than just that book. You can coach people, you can train people, you can speak about it, and really kind of have an expanded vision of what to do with the book, that a lot of people can overlook. So yeah, so about 4.5 years ago is when I first was introduced. A couple years later is when I started writing my book, and now, like I said, I'm kind of in the flow. I have this book coming out. I've got two more in the queue for sure, and I have ideas for others in the future.
Now, has the experience for you, because you went through the experience with the way to greatness, going with has the experience been any different with the second book, or has it been pretty much the same?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like anything. The first time you do something is going to be slower, and you have to kind of fumble your way through things. But the one thing I love about the program is Carrie did a great job of laying out step by step by step, 52 missions that you accomplish, to get your book out there. And so just kind of walking through that the first time, was super helpful to have that framework. Honestly, this time, because I had done it, I didn't even have to go back and review a lot of that. Now I'm in the stage though where it gets very detailed, as you know, like where you're getting your interior design work done and your cover design done, and getting everything uploaded into Amazon and to Ingram Spark, all these places that you put it, to get it out there to the public. And so now I'm back to using the resources of making sure I'm not skipping steps or missing things, to do that. But I would say it's kind of like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it does get on one hand, because you're familiar with it. But it's certainly comforting to know I've got this guide,
Right.
that I can go back to and reference to. Okay, I need to do this, but how do I do that again? Because now it's been a year and a half roughly since I did a lot of those things.
Right. Well, and I always tell people, as daunting and as challenging as writing a book may seem, navigating the publishing side is even more so. And it actually
Oh,
is.
absolutely.
And so to have, to have those steps and have AAE and their team behind it, kind of walking step by
Yeah.
step through it, and to be able to ask them questions, it saved my book, probably, just because
Well,
it was challenging.
yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's more, I guess I didn't think about it that a manuscript was only a part of the book. We think that's the book, but it's like, no, there's all these other pieces, right? Like, what do you put in the front pages before you get to the manuscript that you just wrote, and all these things. And so, so yeah, having that team, having that framework of lessons to, okay, make sure this is there, make sure you're checking on these things and how it all works. And in a lot of ways, it's certainly a lot easier to get published today than in past, decades and generations, for sure. But that also means that you're competing with a lot more out there too. And so I think AAE gives you a great jumpstart or an advantage of knowing from experts who have published and have done this. They're continually updating the content. I know they're refreshing some things right now to help, because things are changing on publishing all the time. So yeah, I mean, it in the community side of it, I think, watching even in the Igniting Souls tribe of authors, where people are going, okay, where do I find that thing? Or how I'm stuck here and I just need encouragement, or I just need some help. and people really responding to that. And, Carrie's super intelligent, and the team of coaches that help are awesome, but the tribe itself going, yeah, we've been there. We've been in that phase. We understand where you are. Here's what I had to learn, or here's what I did, or whatever. So it's the community as well as the program.
Right.
And then you combine that to, hey, I get my book published in the process. It's pretty amazing program.
Yeah. It's been great. I've loved it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here with us in the Ministry Hackers. The book is The Way to Greatness. His other book will come out in hopefully November, The Magnetic Leader. We'll have links for both of those in the show notes, so you guys can get those if you want to. Chris, any parting words for the Ministry Hacker community?
Yeah, I'm super excited that you're doing this, Brandon. I think because, once again, community of leaders is so important, especially in times like this. And when I was a youth pastor, especially, I was in 3 different cities doing my youth ministry work, and in each one I built a youth ministry network, if there wasn't an established one, trying to just get together with other pastors.
Right.
And those relationships were so important. And now we can do this much broader, even on a global scale, right, through a Facebook group, a community even. But I think just making sure that we're not trying to do this and go alone right now, because I think, I think we can all learn from each other at any time. But I think right now, innovation, there's a lot of opportunities, but it's going to be seeing what other people are doing, what they're trying, what's working, what's not working. And so I think that just encouraging, the listeners and the Facebook group members to say, hey, we're in this together, and this is truly about the kingdom, not just about my little kingdom.
Right.
And I think that's so important right now, because the world is a mess in a lot of different ways, and we have the answers with our faith and with Christ. And but competing with one another isn't going to be the answer. We got to partner together and really learn from each other and help each other navigate these challenging times, because right now might be one of the best times in our generation to truly advance the kingdom. Yes. And be a partner with what God's up to. So let's work together rather than compete against anybody.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great word. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for being here in this episode, and we will see you in the next one.